tremendously busy, packed week in San Francisco to make it out to this event for Just Recovery, both on the Greenpeace boat and to accompany many communities that have been on the forefront of the solutions to the climate disasters that we've experienced. And so this morning I woke up and was reading some of the news about what was happening this morning. And we had planned this event way in advance, right? About talking about Just Recovery. And there's so many memories that we shared crossing the Caribbean to get to Puerto Rico here with many of you here that are part of the people that are in this boat right now, but also so many communities and so many contributions that were given to the Climate Justice Alliance to support just recovery efforts in Puerto Rico. But also in St. Croix, there was efforts to continue to support Houston in their efforts to recover from Harvey. And Florida at that time had also been hit by Irma. There's so much that we're experiencing around climate change that needs to have a collective framework as a solution. And those solutions are being led by people on the forefront of both the fossil fuel extractive industry, but also at the forefront of building these really inspiring solutions. And so this morning I woke up and saw Donald Trump's reaction expressing that he had, the U.S. had an A+ effort in Puerto Rico, and remembering that last year, the insulting throwing of paper towels, the way that the disrespect for life, right? 5,000 people on the island have lost their lives, if not more. We wouldn't be able to know by the kinds of stories that are told from the government. And so that's why we wanted to create this space here to be able to share stories directly from frontline communities. And in that effort, recognize that climate disasters are increasing, that the Climate Justice Alliance and the work that we do with our members, creating a platform for them to share their stories directly, is much needed, especially in the environment that we are in right now, where the Global Climate Action Summit are putting forth solutions that are not addressing climate in the urgent manner that it needs to be addressed, but providing distractions through carbon markets, through carbon pricing and other kinds of false carpet screens to address the climate crisis. What's ahead of us is urgent, and the kind of solutions that you're going to hear tonight are providing the urgent response that we need in this moment. So if you have been in Puerto Rico, if you've been in Houston, if you've been collectively building with folks in Florida, if you were part of the recovery efforts in Katrina, if you're part of the global community in the Philippines or Hawaii, or living in North Carolina right now, these stories have a particular strong message for you and a sensitivity to the kind of solutions that we're pivoting towards. So thank you for being here. I'm the Executive Director for the Climate Justice Alliance, and one of that's a CJA staff serving drinks in the back. And also one of very humble stewards of the It Takes Roots Alliance. So please feel free to address speakers after the presentation, and to also go downstairs and see some of the films that we're showing that share in more complexity and more visually the stories that have been developed through the efforts of our community. So thank you for tonight. I'm going to hand it off to the captain of this ship.
Welcome on board, everybody, and thank you for coming. It's a real honor to have so many people here coming, and it's good to see so many familiar faces and friends from when we were here with the Arctic Sunrise in Miami and down in Puerto Rico, where we went last October. Greenpeace has been working on climate change issues for about 30 years, and I've been with Greenpeace for 29 years. We've been going around the world talking to people, different communities, affected nations that don't have a lot of economic power. They're on the front lines, whether it's from sea level rise and larger hurricanes or melting ice and changing ecosystems. And we're seeing more and more climate refugees. And as you said earlier, we're really into an age of climate breakdown right now. And what we're trying to do with Greenpeace is break down the structures that allow fossil fuel companies to continue to hold all of us hostage. And we're not going to find a solution to wars or find peace or do anything to stop climate change until we can shut down the fossil fuel companies. And we're trying to do that with Greenpeace. We've designed and built a new ship, the Rainbow Warrior, which sails primarily under sail propulsion, and we're trying to find solutions for other ships so we can transition our fleet into the next millennium, or the next couple of decades, and show that Greenpeace is going to be around to fight climate change for a long time. And it's just really good to be with all of you, and I'm going to do whatever I can on my part to shut down the fossil fuel companies and to stand with all the communities and nations that are impacted by climate change, because we know that that's going to happen more and more in the future, and on the next generations especially. This is the legacy we're leaving behind, but we still have time to act if we act right now. And we don't have any time to spare, and the longer we wait, the harder it's going to be, and the more difficult the transition will be. So I just want to thank every one of you for everything you're doing for the future generations and for the planet that we're leaving behind. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Strange. I work at Greenpeace USA with the Movement Support Hub, which is, I need to be louder, which is a program that connects Greenpeace with our allies and partners in the climate justice and environmental justice movement, so that we can learn from the strategies that frontline communities are building and developing and leading with, and that we can align our strategies and partner on important work with them. So last year, for me, one of the most important projects that I've ever gotten to collaborate with on behalf of Greenpeace was with Climate Justice Alliance and Organización Boricua down in Puerto Rico, in doing some recovery and just recovery support after Hurricane Maria. And as Joel mentioned, we were able to take Greenpeace's ship, Arctic Sunrise, with a delegation of 10 people, 10 organizers and leaders from across the U.S. And from Puerto Rico, down with us, down to meet with folks down in Puerto Rico who are doing organizing around just recovery. And I'm seeing a lot of the faces of some of those folks who are on that delegation here in the crowd. So if you were part of that, raise it up so everyone can know. Right on. So it's great to see all those faces. This feels like a reunion a little bit, to be back on this ship and to be back seeing all those folks. Also, just let's raise it up if you've been in a community that's been struggling against climate impacts and organizing against climate disaster. All right, a lot of folks across the crowd. So I think that, that sense of reunion and nostalgia is really rich for me right now. It was a really powerful visit for me to be part of personally, but also for Greenpeace as an organization to be part of, to be able to bring our resources to support and to solidarity for a just recovery, and also to learn so much when we got there. On the first night, I remember the image of sailing into the port of San Juan, and we were greeted by kayak activists who were just celebrating that we were coming and who were just applauding, and we were standing over the edge of the rail shouting wildly and holding our banners, and we were so excited to be coming in. And we were greeted with so much love. I mean, Maga, who's here in the crowd, brought us some of the last plantains that had grown on the trees that were destroyed on her farm. And to be greeted and received with that love was so beautiful. And then we started that first night with culture. We had culture and singing and art and street theater performances. It was incredible, and that was the start of it. And then we went out to some of the farms to help with brigades, to help clear the land and help replant. And we also learned, so through doing that, we learned about how important food sovereignty is to recovery. And then we also learned a lot about how energy independence is really important. And just being there and being welcomed and greeted by people was so rich for us. And I really think that big organizations like Greenpeace, who are in the kind of greens and environmental world, we need to learn a lot more about how communities are surviving and recovering from climate impacts. And we need to not just be thinking about that kind of scientific level of what is climate change, but actually what's the real and human level and cultural impact and personal impact about when storms like Florence that's coming into North Carolina hit to communities, and because they're often the ones leading, and they're the ones leading with a more visionary and transformative idea for what the future can be. So I was really honored to be part of that. I'm honored to be able to be part of bringing back some of this like reunion sense and to learn more from some of the other speakers in other communities outside of Puerto Rico who've been struggling and adapting and leading the way for a new vision and just recovery. So welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you're hanging in okay on the ship and all the rocking. We nicknamed it the washing machine because it moves a lot. So hopefully you all are doing okay. Welcome, and we're glad to have you here.
Great. So we're going to ask each panel participant to come up and introduce themselves. I think you might have a mic right next to you if you can pass that around. We're going to ask some basic questions. For some, it's been a year since climate disaster hit. For some, it's more recent. For example, those in California. And so we're going to ask a question of like, how has it been since the disaster actually hit? And what are some of the ways that you are moving forward through a just transition framework or a community people-to-people solution framework that we can build with amongst the different people that are on the panel, but also those that are here in the audience. We are going to first feature Trey Vasquez, Yvette Arellano, Ruth Santiago, Jesus Vasquez, and Judith Neto. And then in a second part of the panel, we'll bring up folks that are actually going to experience a climate disaster, very likely in the next 24 hours, or are about to do that right now. We don't know, right? It's moving as we speak here on the boat. And so in that space, we'll have Aaron Pedrosa from the Philippines come up, and then Elvia Walking Stick from the North Carolina Cherokee Band. So to start us off, I'd like to invite Trey, who is from the North Bay Organizing Project, Trey Vasquez, and who is actually inviting us to hold this space here in California and San Francisco. Trey.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Trey Vasquez, like they said, and I'm actually originally from Arizona, so I've never been on a ship. And you can see how much it's moving from here more than you can from over there. So hopefully I don't get seasick. I wanted to first and foremost start out just to take a moment, just to take a breath together, to think about all those whose lives have been lost to climate change and who can't be here with us today, and to express gratitude for our own lives too. So if we could just do that together. And acknowledge this altar here too, for all those ones. So I'm coming from the North Bay Organizing Project. That's the community that I live in, that I'm accountable to. And as many of you all know, we just recently experienced a fire less than a year ago. And one thing I also wanted to say is we're here with the Right to the City Network too, just have to represent them. Proud to be part of ITR as well. So we are barely coming up on a year, and a lot of us are still reeling from the tragedy, from the crisis of it all. And we talk a lot about these things. We talk about climate change. We make it sound really intellectual, and that's powerful too as a part of our narrative. But there's also this really real part of it it's painful. It's this grief that we feel, and it's also at the same time beauty and resilience. And so I'll just personalize it. For me, I woke up at 2 a.m. with a text from my cousin. She said, we're on fire. There's fire around us. And she's a little dramatic sometimes, so I thought maybe it was far away or whatnot. But I did everything I could to jump up. We got up and pulled together. You realize what's important to you at that moment. You know, the very few things that we had, and took off. And the moment became really real when we're on the freeway and gridlock traffic. And the sun was just coming up, and we could see the fires coming down the hills. And you could just feel that crisis and that confusion and kind of chaos. And so just the state that we are still moving in as a community and organizing on the ground, within a few days, it felt like there was not enough we could do. You know, no matter what we did, it just felt like something new was coming, that we were hearing about how our folks were experiencing it, how we were experiencing it. You start to feel like that, you know. And at this point, we're really working to just stabilize with our community. And some of the ways that we're working on that is, one, just looking at bringing the voices to the center of people who continue to be erased, right? We already know our Frontline's communities continue to be erased and not talked about in that recovery process. Sonoma County depends on tourism as a backbone of its economy, the wine industry. So many folks depend on that harvest for their income. And Sonoma County wouldn't have a tenth of what it does if it weren't for the labor of undocumented folks. We're not a part of that narrative. And who many were working back in the fields within days of the fires, experiencing that smoke firsthand-handedly. So some of the ways that we're working on that stabilization process is through mutual aid. So folks may have heard of the Undocu Fund, which was created as a collection of donations from all over, globally really, and has redistributed over $3 million to undocumented folks who lost their homes or their work. As you know, FEMA doesn't offer any resources to undocumented people. And another project that we're working on mutual aid-wise is something called Sanación del Pueblo, which were healing clinics. We've held 7 so far that offer free treatments, massage, acupuncture, herbalism to folks who were experiencing trauma, and also the toxicity of the smoke. So people could come in and get treatment. People who don't ordinarily have access to that. It was all built by the community volunteer basis and volunteer practitioner. It's a space to really create deep solidarity and at the same time start taking care of each other, have that culture with each other. So we talk about it like all this political stuff, but really we're just doing what our parents would do, what our grandparents would do. We're gonna work together and take care of each other. And then we're gonna try to look at this bigger picture as to why these things are happening. The other piece of how it looks too is that we have seen a 37% rent increase in Sonoma County since the fires. So that's a disaster capitalism, they call it. You know, these developers and real estate agents see it as a prime opportunity. So we're working with our to build a tenants union to make sure that Sonoma County doesn't become completely all white, because that's a way of pushing out folks of color and working people. Right, so that's one thing we're working on. We're also working on rights of nature, so to create this community bill of rights, trying to get it on the ballot in the next 2 years, so that the rights of the Mother Earth and the elements will trump. That's a bad word. Will be valued over. Sorry, I try not to ever say that word. Will be held over corporate personhood. So we're working on that right now as well, and. The last piece is the Immigrant Rights Task Force is continue to work to have our Migra Watch, so looking out for our community and educating employers as well. And I just want to name, you know, like as a lot of communities have experienced, I'm sure people forget about it. You know, it's been a year, they're on to the next news item or the next crisis, right? Because these climate crises are happening all over the place. But we're still in it, you know, and we still need a lot of support there. And I know folks here all must need a lot of support, right? So I think I'll leave on the point of, although we lost 34,000 acres, 5,000 homes, and 20 folks lost their lives, this is an opportunity as well for us to rebuild in the right way, right? And to move just beyond the just recovery, but to really transition to a whole new way of being, or to remember an old way of being that's in reverence to the earth. That's a beautiful way of being, where our well-being and our lives are valued, and we're taking care of the earth as well. So I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yes, It Takes Roots is an alliance of alliances between the Climate Justice Alliance. Raise it up if you're part of the Climate Justice Alliance. Grassroots Global Justice. Right to the City. Yes. And IN. Whoa, great. And so we're doing events this whole week. So if you haven't been a part of It Takes Roots is really all communities that are coming from the ground up, providing solutions and giving a new framework to look at the kind of problems that we're having. And so the next person that we have up to speak is Yvette Arellano from Texas.
Good evening. My name is Yvette Arellano. I work for, I'm a research and grassroots advocate with Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services based in Houston, Texas, with over 10 years of dedication to environmental justice issues, and one of the very first organizations to sort of uplift the issues of living next to such a massive petrochemical complex that Houston houses, being the largest petrochemical complex in the entire nation, the second largest in the world, second only to Saudi Arabia, and in an ongoing expansion and race to become number one, which is what this country is always so proud of being. So Hurricane Harvey now is well over a year ago. It was in August 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th. It went out for about 7 days. National headlines hit when 2-story, 3-story houses were going underwater on the west side of Houston. Images of folks trying to get out and making it onto canoes made headlines. We don't own canoes. We don't have kayaks. We don't have those kinds of resources or recreational activities where we have these things at hand. So on the 26th, when the heaviest rains hit, we were told by Juan, my wonderful director and founder of Tejas, don't come into work. Why? Because we're so used to hurricanes. We live in the Gulf Coast. Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. It's not new. Those are natural disasters. What we lived through was not a natural disaster. It was a human-caused disaster by our own consumption, our production, our greed. So the 26th, as those waters are rising and you go to sleep and you're wishing that your car doesn't go underwater, and you're chatting with friends, because I don't know how many of you remember, but the eclipse had just happened. So folks were sharing on social media everything about the eclipse. Folks were checking in on us through Facebook, just like, how are you doing? That little button. The stores were running out of water, and some folks didn't take it so seriously because we experience hurricanes all the time. It wasn't until the water got halfway up my yard that I decided to strap a ladder next to the house. Because friends who had experienced Katrina said, this is going to be bigger and you need to be ready. And neighbor after neighbor after neighbor started looking for ways to keep the water at bay. But all you saw was a bunch of kayaks. We started checking in with our community partners all along the east side of Houston. The east side of Houston is a 25-mile stretch of 6 refineries and over 300 energy firms, making that massive petrochemical complex. Before FEMA even got on the ground, before the EPA started making hubbub, Governor Greg Abbott had released a natural disaster proclamation. Natural disaster proclamations freeze the enforcement of all environmental regulations. If you live next to a refinery, which in Houston, which is the largest city without any zoning, there are chemical plants next to refineries, schools next to above ground storage tanks that are over 1 million barrels in capacity, and they started leaking. The smell started happening. The burning of the chemicals happened way before the water even got so high, and nobody paid attention. Folks weren't listening because they weren't 3 to 4 story houses. Because Houston refines 30% of the oil that feeds the rest of the nation, housing the second largest refinery in the entire nation. We have Valero, we have PSRI, Shell Deer Park, Exxon Mobil, Chevron Mont Belvieu, and the list goes on. And those emissions were going, and the proclamation was in place, and then people were reaching out and saying, my eyes are burning, my skin is getting irritated. We reached out to community partners and community leaders, the faith communities, economic justice organizations, folks who work with undocumented populations, telling us the same story. I looked around this entire gallery and saw a lot of the symptoms that we face. This is shared pain. This is shared suffering. And yet, local, state, federal agencies were not responding. Organizations like ours had to come up with a recovery bucket. Yeah, American Red Cross has recovery buckets. Let me tell you what was in one of those buckets. 3 broom ends, no handles, a bottle of Clorox. That's it. That's it. That was distributed to a historically black community in Houston called the 5th Ward. So while everybody was looking outside of their window, we were talking. Folks were still looking at those waters rise, and the following light rains kept having that water build. And so we had to come up with a solution. What does everybody need? What do we need right now? Let's make our own buckets. And we did. And with 5 community members, we said we need gloves. We need booties. There's something to cover our legs because of the toxic exposures, because of the leaks, because of the things that people could smell. And no, you didn't need to be a scientist to know that you were being exposed to these things. The buckets were built, and they were starting to be built. We asked for donations, and there was tons of overflowing community support with groups like CJA helping us, because we're in the middle of all of this going on. And while we're trying to do advocacy, we're going through it ourselves. We're having to find our food, find our water, check in with our families, check in with our community members. This is our work. We live our work. And so everything happened, the waters receded, and the questions that weren't asked were the questions that were most important to community members. Is it safe for my children to go outside and play in the parks? There's still residual water. What do children love doing whenever it rains that heavy? They love jumping in puddles. They'll go play with boats. And as they were playing with boats and jumping in puddles, or their parents were going to gas stations to try and find whatever water they could, they were having lesions up their body. Their limbs were swelling up to over twice the size. Upper respiratory issues spiked. Folks could not get to hospitals where you have skyrocketing rates of childhood leukemia, asthma, upper respiratory, eczema, and you can't make it to a hospital or a clinic or renew your prescriptions. That is what our communities were going through and continue to go through, because Governor Greg Abbott renewed that natural disaster proclamation month after month after month. It did not get lifted until April of this year, meaning environmental regulations were paused until then. Over 1 million tons, metric tons of toxic emissions were spewed out into the community. So it is what came after the building with groups like CJA, the building with community organizations and sharing in the pain and suffering, but also sharing resolutions. Like, what are the solutions? We spoke to our friends in Katrina who went through Katrina, and they gave us so much advice. So it takes roots to weather a storm. It really does. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to name that it's tremendously courageous for this panel to be able to come up here and share the stories that are both traumatic and be able to express that in a way that continues to create hope for our communities. And so thank you, Yvette, for taking us back to those moments, because there's a lot of learning there and a lot of community building. And it shows the resiliency of our communities. And so I want to pivot from the US and go to the islands, right? And I say that explicitly because colonialism is a part of the problem. So I recognize the Puerto Rican islands for their own rights and their own sovereignty. I want to bring in Ruth Santiago, and then afterwards Jesus Vasquez to also speak for 5 minutes each.
Thank you, and hello everyone. Very happy to be here with you all. I can actually deal with. So being on this ship brings back memories of the night before the Hurricane Maria. We've had others, but of course that one. I remember watching the news, finishing a document on my computer because I had this feeling that I wasn't going to be able to do much afterwards. So the governor was on the news saying that that there was help coming immediately after the hurricane, that the USS Comfort would be coming to Puerto Rico, that they were waiting and they would be coming to help us address health issues, right? That didn't happen, right? So after the hurricane, communities all over Puerto Rico started picking up the pieces, started clearing the roads, getting the vegetation off, the trees off their houses, dealing with landslides, the flooding, etc. People in communities came together and did much of the work for a long time and are still, right? And so with the communities I work with and where I live in Salinas and Guayama in southeastern Puerto Rico, we're part of that movement. As we have had a long history of organization, it was natural to come in and start the mutual aid, feeding the elderly, the vulnerable people in the communities, self-help, even when the lines for food, the lines for gas were impossible to deal with. The diaspora was a lifesaver. You know, organizations of just people of goodwill in the States and elsewhere were really lifesavers, but certainly the government wasn't. It was a huge disappointment, you know, what we got from the government. Even today, there are so many homes in Puerto Rico that still have no roofs, that are still damaged and unlivable. And with some other groups that I work with in PR, we're trying to address another big issue that has to do with the energy situation. As you know, our grid went down 100% and stayed that way for months and months for a large part of the population. And what we're doing is actually for years before the hurricane, in Salinas, in Guayama, where we are exposed to the all of the negative impacts of fossil fuel generation, because we have the big plants. The two biggest emitters of contaminants in Puerto Rico are in Salinas and Guayama. And so we as communities came together and started proposing solutions years ago, and not much happened back then. After the hurricane, attitudes have changed. People are seeing things differently, fortunately. But that's people in communities. The government is still going in the wrong direction. We're hearing reports. We were at a hearing 2 weeks ago where Siemens Industries, which is a contractor for the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, is saying that they want to make, well, they're actually presenting 4 offshore natural gas projects, and 1 land-based natural gas project and 4 marine-based natural gas projects. In other words, they want to continue the fossil fuel dependence and the burning of what they call a clean fossil fuel, which is totally false, because the nature of burning natural gas on an island and in the Caribbean is different. Even if, I mean, I don't think it's clean even burning it in the continent where the natural gas is available, but bringing it to an island in liquefied form creates a whole additional set of emissions that actually make it even dirtier than what we're burning now. So what we're doing is we're participating in every possible forum to bring attention to this issue. We cannot do the so-called transition from natural gas to renewables. There's been the government and some of the big foundations are talking about doing a transition with natural gas before we can go to a more sustainable system, and not just placing, you know, solar panels on the ground. We don't even have enough land on the islands to do land-based solar systems. We need to use our rooftop resource in Puerto Rico, as the University of Puerto Rico faculty has said for years. So that's what we're working on now going forward, and I think I have to stop, right? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So hello, it's a bit surreal to be standing in this boat because this boat was in Florida and New York before arriving to Puerto Rico right after the Hurricane Maria struck us, right? And it even had people from Puerto Rico in it, right? And I remember we have friends from the Florida Farm Workers Association in Florida who came to this boat, but we didn't know until the crew arrived to Puerto Rico. And they said, I remember we received a message that we had these rosemary plants that were planted by Mexican farm workers in Florida in order to bring it to our farms, right, in Organización Boricua as a sign of solidarity, right? So it's kind of surreal now to be in the Bay Area in the same ship with many familiar faces. And I think also it is very important that we are some bodies and spirits represented here in this panel, but we're just a grain of lots of the struggle that we have a lot of people on the island and in our territories still having. And I just want to uplift also right here in this audience Maga and Roberto, who are from Organización Boricua, Tara, who is working with agroecology also in Puerto Rico, Giovanna, Ivan, and also friends from the Puerto Rican diaspora that were for us when we were in complete blackout, right? If we go back to those times, especially after Hurricane Maria, we were in complete blackout. The port of San Juan, where most of the food enters to Puerto Rico, was shut down. We had a militarized Puerto Rico. In every corner we would see U.S. military. We had very low access to fuel to just know if our relatives were okay, right? So if you want to have fuel for transportation, you will need to do a 13 to 12 hour line and just to get fuel, right? So what were some of the things that we did within Organización Boricua and many other grassroots organizations was to start to organize. You know, once we knew our relatives were okay, I remember driving with my uncle when the government were saying you after 4 p.m. nobody on the streets because there were lots of signs and trees, but we needed to know for sure, right, that our family was okay because our cell phones weren't working and even some landlines. So there was a lot of organization, and in terms of food sovereignty struggle and farming, right, a lot of people that formed us, at least my generation, that anticipated that something like this could happen. And they're still there. I remember talking with one of the founding members of Organización Boricua, Edgardo Alvarado, and we were on his farm, and after doing another brigade, just a working brigade, kind of clearing debris out of the farms in order to people to get out, but also recognition brigades, just to check, just to give us healing support. And he was telling us, like, our ancestors, lived through these climate events, right? And they kept going, right? And he was referring to producing food, right? We have more than 80% of the food that comes from abroad, and we had a lot of people on the island that are doing the patriotic task of producing food, that they already did the just transition, their own personal transformation. They maybe be in debt because of acquiring a farm. They be maybe occupying land. They be maybe are renting farm land from the government, and they're already doing this, right? And so we felt a huge moral responsibility to be there for the people that took this step, right? And just recovery for us was just to go around. We were moving around with La Guagua Solidaria with just a bunch of tools, a bunch of hardware equipment, and rebuilding farming infrastructure. So at the moment of the big winds with Hurricane Maria, we had farmers that were on top of their viveros, of their plant nurseries, just cutting down the plastics, and even the winds just kind of broke some of the tubes, right? And also farmers' houses, their roofs got away, right? And the struggle keeps. A few days from now, it's when Hurricane Maria happened, and we have all of these threats right now in the Caribbean that are, all of these hurricanes every time the hurricane season extends. So how are things looking now in Puerto Rico, right? disaster capitalism is in every corner, and when we talk about disaster capitalism, as the same thing, we have all of these concepts, right? Agroecology, food sovereignty. Agroecology was done in Puerto Rico and in many places of the world with indigenous communities before these concepts existed. We're talking about small-scale food needs to be in charge of the people. So it's a rapid acceleration of capitalism. A lot of U.S. and foreign investment in just acquiring structures in the city, and the government trying to pay the debt that they were responsible with selling our lands, right? So we see it in every corner, but there's a lot of efforts, community kitchens being developed, a lot of communities in the South that have been organizing and that were organizing before the climate events. And right now it is very important that Puerto Rico grassroots efforts needs to be leading, right? Because it's trending now. Puerto Rico foundations, everybody wants to help Puerto Rico. But if we really want to exercise our sovereignty, and all of these groups are exercising their sovereignty with what they do, Puerto Rican organizations and grassroots efforts need to be leading. And just finally to end, I also wanted to lift up the international delegation. We have folks that visit from ATC Nicaragua, from the MSD in Brazil, right? And these are folks also that experience what we're saying in their territories, and we're some of the folks that when we were hit by Hurricane Maria and we finally got access to email or to WhatsApp, we had their messages, right? How are you guys doing? What we can do? Neighbors also from Cuba, right? So I think it is very important to highlight the solidarity, and we appreciate that a lot.
Solidarity and solutions. Have you been hearing that? Yeah. Soul to soul. Soul to soul. It takes roots. So I was going to change a little bit. We had a different lineup, but it's as Jesus was talking about solidarity, I wanted to ask Rico Enrique to talk about the diaspora experience here in the U.S. and the impact that it had, as well as what keeps happening in terms of the organizing and the political strength of the diaspora with the Puerto Rican islands.
Good evening. I'm going to stand because I'd like to address all of you as well. Everyone you see on stage right now, everyone you see to your left and to your right, your front and back, we're all here for the same reason. We're here because our communities are all being devastated by decisions made by the 1%. We're the front line of defense for those communities. If you're here, it's because you believe that a colonized island shouldn't have to foot the bill for its own relief. If you're here, it's because you know industry handouts for emissions permits are not a fair trade for the well-being of your community. If you're here, it's because you refuse to let people like Jerry Brown put you into the ground. I'm here to represent OurPowerPRnyc, the New York City Puerto Rican diaspora's response to austerity, neglect, colonialism, and the impact of Hurricane Maria on Puerto Rico. I'm also representing Uprose in Brooklyn. I came in solidarity with Organización Boricua and Idebajo. I came because there are people on the ground in Puerto Rico making a just transition a reality. People who are sacrificing everything for their communities, building and resisting even when they have lost their loved ones, and those people aren't going to be forgotten. Most importantly, I'm here for what comes next. I'd like to thank CJA, It Takes Roots, and all of our members for saying no to disaster capitalism, and I invite you all to our Power PR's community gathering in New York City on September 20th. This is floppy. I invite you to look back on the past year following Maria and to recognize the distance that we've traveled and the distance we have yet to go. I want us to let this moment be a model of what people from struggle can accomplish. From 5 brigades to national media attention to moving money to the front line, our love and solidarity is unquestionable. We hope you join us in fighting for sovereignty and a Puerto Rico for Puerto Ricans. I hope to see all of you out on the 20th at Union Square for our Power PR NYC. Much love. Thank you.
Thank you. It's getting chilly out here. Who's gonna start the bonfire? We're gonna pass it on to Judith, who's gonna talk a bit about Another Gulf is Possible and the kind of creative, inspiring, visual and community-rooted expressions that have come out after a number of the hurricanes last year. And I also just want to give some love and props to Brian Barras, who's here, who actually started this concept of just recovery, right? I think that Brian and the communities in Houston that were experiencing Harvey started talking about just recovery and how to move from humanitarian relief or this concept of quote-unquote natural disasters to demanding a just recovery from climate disasters. So thank you, Judith.
Buenas noches a todos. Gracias. Mi nombre es Judith Nieto. I grew up in Houston, Texas. I'm originally from Mexico. I've worked with Brian Barras as well for many years, with Tejas as well, about 5 years before I joined Another Gulf is Possible, a collective led by all women of color, indigenous, queer, Mexican, or Latinx women, leading the way that we want to organize our communities, the way that we want to speak to our communities, and not for, but alongside our communities. I actually wasn't in Houston during Harvey, but I was in a message thread with all of my family because I'm the go-to person when something goes wrong in the community, and I have to notify Brian to go check it out. But I wasn't in Houston. I got stuck in Atlanta, and I couldn't get a flight, and I couldn't drive either because the highways were blocked. So it took me a few days to get back to my family. But in the meantime, while I was not able to get to my family, that's when we started the Just Recovery calls with a lot of organizations across the Gulf and in Houston, and had conversations about what it would look like to set up a support network. And we want to talk about resiliency. You know, we definitely have to honor our relationships and the relationships that we build, because that was the way that I was able to help my family. Me not being able to be there for them in Houston, I was able to contact Brian. I was able to contact homies that were at Standing Rock that sent the leftover gas masks that weren't used at Standing Rock. They were able to send those to my grandmother, and she was able to pass those out to our family members and neighbors. And I missed to tell you that I grew up in a refining community in Manchester, in the east end of Houston, where we're completely surrounded by industry. We have only one way out of the community, really, because the other one is usually blocked off by a train. So there is no evacuation route for us. For us, it's shelter in place and pray that you don't die the next day. So I was really scared. Manchester doesn't flood, but the ditches flood, and the runoff from the tanks, as Yvette mentioned, stays in the soil. So our soil is completely contaminated from years of exposure. Our air is completely contaminated, and our water. And during and after Harvey, the refineries have all been broken up and are not functioning the same way. We have emissions, we have explosions happening very frequently. We have alarms going off at 3 a.m. and explosions going off at 3 a.m. Because they're releasing something or they've encountered a problem, and we don't know who to ask or who to call, and that's been there for many years. And after Harvey, that hasn't changed and hasn't helped much. After a while, we hosted the People's Tribunal on Harvey recovery, and a lot of the stories that were being told by other communities resonated with me, and it was very triggering to hear all of them all in the same day. But it was refreshing to see that a lot of communities were finally now communicating. Houston is a very big city, so a lot of the times, a lot of people don't even know where Manchester is, even though we're in the city, we're Houstonians, and nobody really knows where it's at. The only way you're able to know is if it's featured on the news because of an explosion, somebody's talking about it, or there's a toxic tour happening and people actually get out of their homes and go visit the East End where the sacrifice zone lives, right? But again, when we're talking about recovery, we want to honor the relationships to CJA, to organizations that, you know, do support frontline communities and grassroots efforts, because that's really why we're able to survive and we're able to count on each other as elected officials, and the politicals locally and nationally are not responding to our needs. We're the ones who are the first responders, really. We're the ones who send each other texts to get out of the neighborhood. We're the ones to respond when there's an issue. And really, we have our relationships to give thanks to for being able to hold each other when nobody else will in the state. Everybody is in cahoots with all of the refineries. The Valero refinery is the one that lives in the neighborhood right now, and they're actually still asking for a permit to continue to release emissions on hydrogen cyanide, which they're holding a meeting on September 20th to talk about the possibility of allowing Valero to have that permit. And the community, again, you know, it's there's a lot of education that also needs to happen, because the community doesn't have a lot of those resources, and they don't get told what's in the air, they don't get told what's being emitted, and we can ask questions and they actually get really aggressive with us. We're one of the communities that is hyper surveilled, and we have surveillance constantly by Valero security and police and even ICE now, and after Harvey that only got worse. So there's a lot of intersections happening, and I'm really glad to be here with you all, because I feel like these types of gatherings, what is creating is these networks of people and grassroots people that are really there and honoring each other and really committed to helping each other and becoming each other's resource. So yeah, thank you for having us, thank you for being here, and thank you for also wanting to build with us.
Thank you, Edith. You'll be able to see more around the film From Another Gulf is Possible, and some documentation from the Harvey Houston tribunals downstairs in the warm hall. But you know what, we wanted to, part of the goal for It Takes Roots being in the Bay is to uplift the voices of impacted communities and demonstrate that place-based solutions are happening across the world. The other goal of being here is to challenge and contest the solutions that are coming out of the Global Climate Action Summit, and to stop another climate disaster. And that is what the conversations can lead to if we don't take a popular and united front stance against climate change from a place-based and frontline perspective. And so as we were preparing this, we recognized that within the delegation of 600 It Takes Roots members that are here, those communities also had members from North Carolina, the Cherokee Band, and then also from the Philippines, coming in from the movement of climate justice. And so we wanted to invite them to participate as well. So if you all stay with us for another 10 minutes, we want to hear their stories. Is that great? Is that cool? Can we do that? Thank you. So it's a real honor to have Elvia Walking Stick with us, and I'd love to hear both, you know, what the climate problems are in North Carolina as we speak, and what community solutions you all have been building to weather the storm.
Shiel Nagata, Elvia Dolanas de Daguadel, Western North Carolina, the Guaynashan. I come from Western North Carolina, which is on the Tennessee border, so we're inland in North Carolina. North Carolina is in the direct path of Hurricane Florence, as well as South Carolina as well. What we're dealing with is very similar. We have representatives who represent themselves and their own interests, and the communities who are trying their best to implement community-based solutions. North Carolina was told in 2012, there was a big report, the coastal research was told that this was getting ready to happen, and at that time what our state chose to do and our governor chose to do was to pass a policy or a law where they blocked any kind of solutions that were presented with that kind of research. It was going to, or does affect their prices on their real estate. So what we're dealing with is we're having this come to us knowing that it was coming and with no real proactive activity happening. So we're, in like many of these communities, reactive. So here we sit, again, predicted that this was going to happen, and so now we're going to ride this out apparently. I know with my tribe, we are, again, we're inland, so we're going to get hit, but we're not expected to get it as bad as the coast. So we have sent out all of our resources that we can to keep, what am I trying to say? So we're not stretched out, and then my understanding is they're in contact with the rest of the state to ride it out and see what happens once they assess the situation or whatever. It starts to rock and roll, because that's where we're at. Nobody knows how it's gonna happen, what's gonna happen. Where I come from, my state is very diverse in that I live on the side that is located in the Smoky Mountains, so we have the forest and stuff, but the other western part of my state is in an area that is very vulnerable. It's, again, they knew this, and so they're going to sit here and wait for it to happen and then hope. I don't know what they're doing, the same thing that they're always doing. So I'm listening to everybody talk, and it really it's really emotional because I have such a connection to where I come from. There were prayers laid down before I ever existed for us to be there, and I know that's how you guys all feel about where you come from. So I can't imagine, and I'm just praying for everybody that's in the line of this, that what do you do when you have leadership where we're at? So, I mean, this all ties into everything. We got GCAS doing the exact same thing, where they are proposing solutions that have nothing to do with those that are going to be affected by these decisions. And that's where we're at. So I really don't know what else to say except here we go, and we'll do it together. We've been here forever. We're going to still be here, and I love you guys, and thank you for being here.
Yes, I am Aaron Pedrosa from the Philippines, a member of the Philippine Movement for Climate Justice, as well as the Secretary General of Sanfas. But right now, I'd like to speak for another organization which we founded in the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan. I don't know if you remember Typhoon Haiyan, but come November 8th, it's gonna be the 5th year, half a decade since Typhoon Haiyan, the strongest typhoon to ever make landfall, displaced almost 1 million families in the Philippines. 13 million to be exact by the United Nations count. Local statistics peg the death toll at more than 10,000 people, but officials at government statistics put it at 6,300. You could just imagine the depth and the intensity of the storm when 7 to 8 ships barreled inland. These are ships bigger than the Arctic. The ship we're on right now, and going to urban poor communities, informal settlement. So they died. They just perished because of the typhoon. Now my family was in Tacloban because, of course, we live in Tacloban. I was out for a conference in Manila, but we're so used to typhoons that people usually celebrate when there are typhoons because there won't be work, no school days, right? So they'd be home with the family, telling stories, enjoying each other's company. But Typhoon Haiyan was something that never happened, and it exceeded anyone's expectation. It actually crippled the capacity of more than 170 cities and municipalities. You could just imagine. So they didn't have the capacity to respond because the responders were either dead, the entire infrastructure was destroyed. I've been hearing about the grid being out. We also had 1 year no electricity because it toppled down the transmission lines. And when news broke out of Haiyan, we saw the earlier footage coming in. I recognized the community being next to my home, and there were dead bodies everywhere. So I had to take the next flight to Tacloban, but there weren't any available flights. It wasn't until 2 days after that the first commercial flight was finally allowed from Cebu. That's another island across Leyte. Tacloban is in Leyte, and seeing Tacloban from the sky is as if it has been bombed, all black. When the doors open, when the plane doors open, you could immediately smell the stench of dead people. And we walked, because there weren't any jeepneys, that's the public transportation. We'd walk from the airport to our community less than a kilometer away. Dead people just left side, right side of the road. And it's just like something from a dystopian movie, you know. There were people pushing carts covered in mud. You see the trauma. But the Filipino spirit, you know, the resilience, they call it resilience. When the crew, the news came by, they'd be smiling, waving their hands as if nothing happened. But you can imagine every night, because there was no electricity, the paranoia was growing. After the mass confiscation, they call it looting of the malls, looting of the grocery stores, everything. People started to worry about what's going to happen for their safety. So military people were fielded into the city. There was curfew. And in one of these curfews, one of our leaders was actually mauled by the military. And the government program came in. They actually allowed 24 corporations to determine the rehabilitation. One area, a mining affected community of Eastern Samar, where people are against mining, they allowed the mining community to head the housing program. So they call it disaster capitalism. And the government rehabilitation plan included displacing coastal communities 27-kilometer stretch from Tacloban to Tanawan. It's been 5 years, but the target of 201,000 homes, that's almost half of the impacted houses, hasn't been met. We have yet to spend and to raise $7 billion. That is the requirement for the strategic intervention rehabilitation for Tacloban. And that's 2% of our gross domestic product. At that year, it was 10% of our national budget. And Haiyan is only one of the 20 to 21 typhoons that hit our country annually. As we speak, another typhoon is already in the Philippine area of responsibility, almost as strong as Haiyan, 300 km/h wind. So we fear for the worst for the communities in northern Luzon. Because the government is the slowest when it comes to these kinds of things, we built a network that's Bulig Pilipinas now, by the affected communities wanting to help themselves, helping each other to help themselves back on their feet. And that intervention allowed also for us to push for our own demands. Headed by the Philippine Movement for Climate Justice, we had a people's platform for rehabilitation. The government was saying corporations can lead the rehabilitation. We said no, rehabilitation should be led by the people. You know, relief was coming in the US, the Filipino diaspora. We are 8 million Filipinos all over the world, and relief was coming in. But the relief, the kind of assistance, was determined not by the affected communities, but by those who weren't even there. For example, the government provided lipsticks for the school teachers when what they needed were teaching support, your materials. So with GCAS happening and with COP, Conference of Parties, in December this year, we want to remind them of Haiyan, that if nothing changes, we expect more Haiyans to happen. With global temperature increase expected to exceed what has been agreed in the Paris Agreement, we think the devastation felt by the Philippines will be experienced by more countries of the South who do not have the capacity to adapt. So I hope we can send a message, strong message, not just by retelling our experience, but by carrying a common demand. The demand for just transition, the demand for ambitious reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and the demand for countries of the North to pay up their climate debt.
Thank you. Welcome, fellow brother from the Climate Justice Alliance in Philippines. I think what we're reminded at this moment as a Climate Justice Alliance and Right to the City, Indigenous Environmental Network, and Grassroots Global Justice is that it takes roots is not just a slogan. It's a real viable solution that comes from the bottom up. You will not silence us. That happened when we were in Puerto Rico doing a press conference there. So what we want folks to take away, you that are here on the ship, those that are listening to us on the live stream, is if you're going inside of GCAS, you must be putting forth a people's lens.
That's right.
The people's lens and the people's solutions. Go in there and ask who's making decisions, who's benefiting, and at what costs. And if you're not getting the answers that are providing solutions within GCAS that lift up communities, then challenge them. Challenge day after tomorrow. And you have a place and a role in assuring that those solutions that are being put forth are being put forth in the benefit and of frontline communities and communities across the world. Many that share the same struggle and stories that are being shared here on the stage today. We welcome you to come up to the altar and put your prayers and your aspirations. And each one of these sunflowers is an expression of the struggle. The sunflower has historically been the struggle symbol of It Takes Roots. I want to welcome here Patricia Joseph, also from California, from the Hoopa tribe. Am I saying that right? Yes, to come and close us out. So symbolic, the stories that they've been sharing also with the wildfires. And then I invite you all to join us downstairs, where we'll be sharing some more warmth and some great visuals also of the solutions being shared. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're from the press, you're welcome to also stay around and interview some of our panelists.
Thank you for allowing us to be here. Can you hear me?
Maybe get a little closer.
Okay. Thank you for allowing us to take this space. I am Patricia Joseph. I'm from the people in the Tinaway, we call ourselves. We're from the northern tribe of California. We're out of Hoopa. It's the largest land base in California, but we're not large in numbers. But we do have a large land base. I represent California Kitchen. We came out of Standing Rock. We originated there in Standing Rock. And we were there for 5 months. And when we came home, we knew that Standing Rock had to continue in our hearts and spirit and with our people to be able to carry on what was original purpose there, to come together in prayer, to be able to serve one another and love one another, and to take care of each other. And so California Kitchen is continuing to do that in social services, environmental services, and in any way that we can take a form in helping our people. We're here to represent us in Northern California, but we're also here to hopefully make them make the right choices for us. We believe that we are people of the environment. We believe that it's our duty, it's our responsibility, it's our job for us to take care of everything that has spirit around us. And mostly that seventh generation, it's my job as a grandma to teach them to grab a hold of that and take it further down for my descendants to be able to continue on. And so that's pretty much, I'm going to turn it over to my sister tribe here. She's from where we are, but I would like to give a closing prayer if you would all pray with me, and hopefully our words can be heard. Please stand if you're capable. Aho, Minasang. We come to you with this feeling in our hearts of being able to embrace the resiliency of our peoples all across the world and the nation, to be able to come forth at this time to take care of our responsibilities that we promised to take care of before we came here. We know that we have those ancestors behind us, and we pray that through their strength and their resiliency, that we will be able to deliver the messages and the purpose of our intent to be here for those that are looking at us from the fourth generation down. We fight this fight for them.
Delahan, she Cinco Tesla Nashling. She Tawa Deni. I come from the village of Neely Chundon, and I just wanted to share a song with you. It's a song about going home in a good way. Gwalesham Washington Day Tene Hawana Sham Gwalesham Washington Day Tene Hawana Sham Hiyo Hey no hey one no higher Hiye Hey no hey one no higher Gwalesham Washington Day Tene Hawana Sham Hiyo Hey no hey one no higher Gwalesham Washington Day Tene Hawana Sham Hiyo Hey no hey one no higher Hiyo Hey no hey one no higher Hiye Hey no hey one no higher Hiye. And that's a song that comes from our language up here, the Tawadeni, and it's a song that we've shared over generations, and I just want to share it with you. On a good way.